Welcome to the Propaganda Report. This is Monica Perez.
And I'm Brad Binkley.
We have a very special guest today. He is America's most trusted lawyer. And that could make him the first among one, but we'll leave that alone for now. He goes by Legalman and has the must-listen podcast called The Quash. I love his show. It's only 20 minutes an episode, so I really like that it's short. It's not exactly sweet, but somehow Legalman's combination of legal knowledge, experience, dark humor, self-righteous anger, and well-placed profanity just cracks me up every time. So without any further ado, I bring you Legalman. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
It was really a pleasure for me to discover your show because somehow you take the stuff that really drives us all crazy and is ruining everything for everyone, and it makes me laugh. And it's mostly because you're just pissed off all the time, but you're so articulate about it, and you weave your great expertise in with an artful use of vulgarity. And I just don't know why it tickles my fancy, but I've talked about your show a few times on my show, and I just felt like I really wanted to ask you questions and find out where you came from and all that stuff. And Binkley, you turned us on to something. We have a show called The Propaganda Report, and we had never heard of the propagandist you highlighted on your blog, who Willie, what's his name?
Munzenberg.
Yeah. So Binkley, I bought Binkley a book based on your recommendation of getting into that guy. So we've got lots to talk about. We only have an hour to talk about it. So let's dig in. But first, Legalman, I just wanted to ask you just a little bit about your background and kind of what you've been doing all this time to build up your, I mean, obviously you're a lawyer, but like your knowledge is so broad and deep. What's your kind of background and experience? What do you focus on?
Well, I actually have practiced for just more than 30 years. I graduated a little more than 30 years ago. And when I got out, I clerked at some of these big sort of national firms with hundreds and hundreds of lawyers in them. During the summer, and then I took a job at a big firm with hundreds and hundreds of lawyers, and I kind of saw the way the system worked there, and it was pretty despicable. And so I left after about 3.5 years, and I would have been booted a lot earlier, except I had a couple partners that really liked me, but I was a troublemaker at the place, and I'm just kind of a troublemaker wherever I go. If people don't do the right thing, I tend to call it out. And so I left and I went and worked at the PD's office being a public defender because I wanted to try some cases and really get in the courtroom.
Public defender. I wouldn't have pegged you for that.
Yeah. Well, a prosecutor just didn't sound very good to me, but I wanted to get a bunch of trials. I'm sorry?
You even knew back then.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
I've
a little
always
tricky
been
because public defender, it feels like, oh, you're defending guilty people. But if you're, say, have a libertarian bent, you realize that so much of the law and even the process is like 98% of all convictions are from plea bargains.
They just plead people out.
That's not the right process.
Yeah, they plead people out. And, the reality is for me, I'm a lawyer, you're either entitled to a defense or you're not. I mean, the state is incredibly powerful. And so I've always been a hardcore libertarian my whole life. And, I was raised in a family with my father who was really basically a communist. And so it was a strange deal. And he still is very much a hardcore liberal even today. He doesn't talk about it much, but that's kind of what I grew up in, and we argued all the time. I mean, all the time. That was just kind of a family pastime, not like argued angrily with each other, just argued a lot. And so I became quite adept at it. And then when I became a public defender, I saw how really, truly crooked that system was. I couldn't take it very long. I stayed about 1.5 years to try a bunch of cases. Then I went and I worked with some friends of mine from law school, started a personal injury firm, and I went there, and that was actually pretty interesting and helpful to, again, sort of represent sort of individuals, and people always run down kind of, quote, ambulance chasers. But people don't understand those are the people who represent the individuals. These people slit their own throats when they represent insurance companies. Then they realize, oh, my God, now I'm hurt. Now I need something. And
well, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
As we go through all the damages that people say could happen if you don't wear a mask or if you write something scary online or provocative online. And I mean, I told you I went to law school, but I'm not a practicing lawyer. I really don't know. I'm just trying to remember from the really nebulous BS I learned in school that seemed to get me further from the truth. But as I look at all these cases, I can almost always say, like when they say, well, you can't cry fire in a crowded theater. My answer is actually, I think you can, as long as you are responsible. This system is set up to hold you responsible for actual damages. And that's a big deterrent. And I would say the same thing about online speech. If you can prove actual damages, which is all like tort law, I think that's the answer to the regulatory state. I might be a little rusty on this, and they didn't teach me libertarianism in law school. But am I right about, like, I feel like that is the one defense we have against having to have the big apparatus of bureaucracy and regulations.
So we're talking about the attempt to regulate online speech.
Yes. Yes. I'm talking mainly about speech, that they say we have to regulate it because you could hurt people. And I say that you don't have to regulate it. That's what being held responsible for actual damages comes from. Sure. is our system for that.
Yeah, and for me, this would be a good example of what I call the difference between strategy and logistics, and that is, yeah, I agree. In theory, that all works great. Logistically, as a practical matter, trying to get damages against somebody is basically impossible because you'd have to hire a lawyer and he'd have to take it on a contingency, and the people have to be recoverable. I mean, the fact I get a judgment, good luck collecting it. But you and I are on the same page. I still don't think it should be regulated like they do. That's preposterous. Because as we both know, a regulation for speech like that to claim that it's there to actually protect people from having their reputation destroyed, that's ludicrous. The entire purpose of that kind of thing is to make sure that they can destroy the reputations of the people they want to, and the people who they don't want to have their reputations destroyed. They don't really have any way to come back. They destroy it or they don't.
So you podcast and you don't seem to hold back on your skepticism about this being a pandemic because there aren't any bodies anywhere. And I wonder myself, like I fear a little bit because they pick and choose who they go after with this kind of stuff.
Sure.
Could they go after a person and say, you told people it wasn't real and then they didn't wear a mask and they got sick and we're going to sue you into oblivion because of that?
Well, I mean, there's no defense if the system itself decides to do that. If an individual who's unsupported by the system attempts to do that, they'll go nowhere. If the system itself is supporting somebody with some kind of phony baloney lawsuit and they push it through into the courts and everything else, well, I may get tagged. I don't know. I don't personally think believe me, they put me in front of a jury, that at least I would be entitled to a jury. I feel pretty comfortable in front of a jury that that's not going to happen. But there is no defense against a rigged system that they decide to go after you. And so I don't worry about those kinds of things because, in fact, there's no defense. It doesn't matter. They'll make something up if they want to.
If it were that, if it got to that point, they do make stuff up, or they could off you for that matter.
Of course, they'll find kiddie porn on my machine before they'll do anything like that. The
whistleblower. There was a whistleblower, Donald Sackleben, he blew the whistle on Brennan and like the second underwear bomber in Yemen, and he went to jail for kiddie porn on his computer. This is an FBI agent. Binkley, he's got something.
That's what I'm saying. This is the deal I tell people all the time. It's like, look, you do it in a way that's rational and that's reasonable. And if they decide to go after you, it doesn't matter if you've done it. You've done nothing wrong. They'll just
live
invent
free or
something.
die, buddy.
They'll just invent something. What I say online, I don't tell people that there's no danger. I just say the danger is absurdly overblown. And whatever danger there is, even if there was 50 million people dead, the government still doesn't have any right to do what it is doing. So
I
it's
have
irrelevant.
to ask about that. But Binkley has a question for you first.
There was a story a few days ago about the first wave of COVID-19 workplace lawsuits that have arrived where employees are filing lawsuits claiming that they contacted the coronavirus as a result of their employer's negligence. And there's a debate that's emerging about whether or not Congress should grant businesses liability protections during the epidemic.
Well, I mean, again, it's preposterous. One, those types of lawsuits, to the extent they're even out there, they're just a shakedown. I mean, the company, if it's a large enough company, has to make a business decision, just like you do if you're a linebacker and you gotta make a business decision. Are they going to settle a case like that? Who knows? I mean, they can't even isolate the virus. How are you ever going to prove cause and effect on this kind of thing in a real trial? It's never going to happen.
That's the thing, is that I remember I had a friend who got a speeding ticket, and he said it was a speed trap, and he went to court and he proved that they had done a study of the area and the speed limit was supposed to be set higher than it was. So they set it low, he was speeding, and he got away with it because it wasn't like the correct law. And I wondered if there are real standards. I can't imagine this is within your experience, but you seem to know like everything. So I'm asking you, is there a system, is there a general rule where you have to kind of present with, especially with this kind of policy, which is outside the realm of what any libertarian would think was in the purview of government, but it is what government says they have the right to regulate. Don't they kind of have to come up with evidence and basically a cost-benefit analysis, especially for health policy? Maybe it's not a technical cost-benefit analysis, but surely they have to make some evidence-based decisions, and I don't see that here, and I don't know how they're getting away with that. Maybe that's not a real thing.
Are you asking whether or not Congress has to have some kinds of objective findings in order to pass the law? Are you talking
Well,
about?
I don't think, I'm not talking about the congressional laws, although I'd be fine with that. They just shut down the whole,
so you're talking
I don't know, but I'm just
about
saying, like, in the cities, they're saying you have to wear a mask, or they're putting people in jail. I have a friend who's might be going to jail for having had a party at his Irish pub on St. Patrick's Day. And I just feel like whatever law it was that they used, a regulation, last minute regulation they used against him, don't they have to justify that somehow? Not don't they have to, but isn't it customary for them to justify that?
So you're saying that you get charged with a crime and then you want to go in and use as a defense that the law itself is, in effect, not valid because they didn't jump through the proper hoops and therefore it has no basis?
I guess that it's an arbitrary health regulation that you can't put people in jail for if it's not, it's just because there's something there, Well,
there's countless they haven't done anything. And of course, the idea that they have to do anything is just an illusion. They don't have to do anything. Right. They can do whatever they want, they can get away with. And in a situation like this, it's not significantly different than whenever there's a national problem. I remember back in 2008 with all the mortgages that melted down, and they had that electronic MERS system they'd set up. And of course, every one of those mortgages, when they had the titles were not properly filed because this title law in states requires this very specific paper document trail, and they didn't have it. And also, in effect, all those mortgages they were trading around through MERS, they really had no right whatsoever to ever foreclose on any of them. And it's similar to this kind of thing where, they don't really have a basis for any of this, but they just start saying it. And then that's probably one of the reasons why the federal government might want to step in. It's the same reason they have these friendly suits by attorney generals, which is how they washed it out 2008. They brought these attorney generals brought suits on behalf of all these people to supposedly protect them. And all it really was a way to make sure that all these MERS titles, that you were poured out if you tried to fight it.
Yeah,
because it was a guaranteed winner for you because they couldn't possibly prove they had a right to foreclose because they were in violation of the statutes. Right. And they'll do the same kind of thing here.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is that there has to be some, at least for show, kind of recourse. And how do they get around that? And yes, a show suit that they could control. Yeah, that
100%. That's all it is. It's always a show. If it's any kind of bigger kind of lawsuit, the attorney generals always jump in and just make sure they clean it all up. That's all that
Right.
ever happens.
Right. I understand.
And they'll do the same thing here.
So when you look at, I mean, I hear how cynical you are about government when I listen to your show, and I mean that I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I actually am moving towards agorists and like thinking that there should be agrarianism and barter in my world. Like I want to buy land somewhere in the middle of nowhere. That's where I think we are right now. And I went from 0 to 60 just during the Corona times. I started out by reading Ted Kaczynski's, just by coincidence. He has a new book that, I don't know if you've ever read his manifesto. Or
I read his manifesto years ago.
Yeah, so I had never read it, and I read it just as this thing was beginning, and he is like, it all started with the agricultural revolution. Like, it's all, every state is a slave state is how I kind of shorthand it. And then this Corona times thing came, and I'm looking around, I'm like, wow, they just snapped their fingers, told everybody to stay home. At any moment, they could withdraw our access to food. I mean, we are absolutely, completely dependent on them, and I can be a libertarian all I want and defend the Bill of Rights, but the fact is, I have no actual independence or liberty if I don't have any actual autonomy. So that's where I've gone, and I've never heard you talk about kind of what your next step thought is about how far we've fallen in such a short amount of time, and if it has changed your idea of what the kind of hope is or the future looks like.
Yeah, I get this a lot actually on my Twitter thing and in person, because what I tell people is very depressing to them, and so they want hope. And, I have a variety of things. I actually did a show on why, and I haven't released it yet. I think I'm going to bring it out next Monday. But it's a very interesting question. It has several parts, in my opinion. One, is this something we're talking about hope, or are we talking about a practical application for improving our lives?
Well, either one. So there's the one Harry Brown wrote, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, which is basically I feel it's like carving out your space in the system as it is. But I feel like there's no security in that whatsoever. And I mean, I'm not going to get into all the reasons why I think that, but now I feel like the only answer is to have a backup plan, at least have some arable land with a source of water on it. Like that's how
Sure.
I'm thinking. Hope is useless to me because it keeps people in the feeling okay about a situation that may just be binary. They let you live like this or they don't. And if they don't, what are you going to do?
Yeah, well, for me, I think I probably have a slightly different view that doesn't provide a lot of comfort for a lot of people. Mine's based more in the fact that I'm not a big believer that this is the only life I have. And I'm much more of a sort of yogic kind of view on life. And so this is more of a big giant movie. Now, as far as being able to operate within the system, I had a great system set up. It worked like a charm, and I could avoid all the general public, and I could do my thing, and I didn't really have to deal with a lot of different kinds of people. And then they blew it all up. And so
Right.
The reality is, it's very clear to me that there are no rules. There are no longer any limits, that anything you attempt to do inside the system is vulnerable. They can crush you. You can go get land, they'll just come get it. I mean, the water rights, just shut them off. I mean, if they want you, it's always
Right.
the same. If they want to terminate your situation, then they do. And so it's just a question of how much additional bumper room do you want? And I've got buddies who live overseas, they're expats. I've got people who live in the States. I've heard a whole bunch of different variety of things. And for me personally, I don't have a problem with the fact that it looks like we're in the end game and the likelihood I'm going to be able to successfully defend myself and have some kind of wonderful kind of golden age retirement kind of crap. That's just out the window. And I'm okay with that, because that's reality. And I don't think, honestly, that there's going to be anywhere to go. That doesn't mean that if you go out in the middle of nowhere and do that stuff, that you won't buy yourself significantly more time. I think there's a good likelihood you will, because everything's going to be done by priorities. It's just, one, I have no skills. Two, I don't really like being out in the middle of nowhere. I just don't enjoy it. And in order to get away, I'd have to go and live in the middle of nowhere. Well, I don't want to. So I'd rather just die in my little mud puddle than I would go out and try to scratch out something. I don't have survival skills. I can't go to Alaska and build my house and ride around on a snowmobile and hunt. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. Okay, I don't know how to do it. I'm not going to learn. I don't care. If I am going to go out, I'm going to go out doing what I've already decided to do. I'm going to try to work within the system. I'm pretty damn good. If you give me rules, I can read them.
That's what I was wondering, that you have an
Right.
advantage. I think that if you're savvy about the system and you know
Right.
the rules, like, you have a better chance because those are your skills staying
Right.
alive in this situation.
And there's always exceptions. There's always Ferengified exceptions to everything. And I know a couple good buddies who are doctors. So this thing has to be administered.
Nice.
Okay, well, I have doctors. They can administer it to me.
Right.
We have no idea what the rules are going to look like. And until they come out, I've just told the people I'm around, I'm like, I can't make a decision until I see what the actual terrain looks like. What is the legislation? We still haven't seen anything yet. Now,
Do you have, go ahead.
yeah, well, I'm just thinking that maybe they'll try to take a huge bite. Maybe they won't. Maybe, there's going to be a lot of pushback against some kind of mandatory vaccine, but much less against testing. And so there's so many different ways they could go. I like to wait and see what we actually have. It's a rule of thumb I have, which is I don't solve problems I don't have yet, because I have plenty of problems to solve. And so I wait until I actually have the problem in front of me, and then I look at it. And that's where I am at this point.
Well, I think it maybe takes a little bit of foresight or vision to think of the possibilities. Maybe not, but do you have any feeling of kind of like who runs the show and what their end game bigger picture might be? Like, I just look at technology and I think if they were trying for totalitarianism 70, 80, 100 years ago, they did not have the tools to really make that stick. But now I feel like they do, and they've plugged us all into that system. And if there is some kind of big cabal, but I know you have the very big picture, which is this life doesn't matter as much as some people think it does. But how about a big picture on the who's running things and where they headed?
On the practical matter of where things are headed, all I can know for sure is that they want more and more control, and they want us to have a much worse situation because they like to have a better situation. And it's very clear they can never be satisfied. It won't matter if they have the entire world in complete lockdown. They're still not going to be satisfied because they're very dysfunctional, either people or something else. Who knows what they are? They could be anything. I have a hard time believing that they're even human, just because their motivations are so foreign to me. And it doesn't mean they might not just be sociopaths or psychopaths. Maybe they are. I don't know.
Yeah, a whole cabal of them. Because when you look at my view of this thing, are you familiar with the Event 201 from October?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
The coincidence?
Yes. So we were on terrestrial radio for 8.5 years. I was on for 8.5 years. Binkley was my producer in Atlanta, which is where the CDC is. And I would say everything I thought on that show. I mean, I never held back. And when I started talking about Event 201, I just got my walking papers just out of nowhere. And that was, so I looked at that, and so let's say this whole thing is planned, that that was the planning grounds. Those are the blueprints. Everything is unfolding. When I think about the amount of pain and suffering and the lives that will be lost just from the cruelty of destroying everything that really billions of people probably are much worse off, that to me does seem superhuman in its coldness, and it's like as if they think they're a different form of life. So
yeah. I think we're cattle. It's like the way that we look at cattle almost.
Yeah, they're very. It's similar to someone who's a very callous rancher who treats their animals poorly. I think that's a pretty close analogy. I remember that there was a guy, and he was from Britain, and I can't remember his damn name now, but he died. He was like in his late 30s. This was about 2 years ago. Died on a couch. He was investigating the pedophilia at some of these major U.S. bases in Europe, and he was in Poland at the time that he died. And the reason I bring him up is because his theory and the stuff he wrote about was that the creatures that are at the top and I'm not saying I'm endorsing or promoting because I haven't looked into it, and it's another type of thing we can never know, but that what they did, they actually used as an energy base fear and trauma was what they used. That's what they wanted. That's what they grew on. And as crazy as that sounds, you look at what they do and what happens in the world, and it's hard to say. It's not at least plausible. And they killed him. See, they killed him.
Oh, wow.
They gave him a heart attack, late 30s, absolutely perfect health, no problem. They killed him when he was looking into that stuff. And so, he was touching a nerve. And it doesn't mean that it's right. It just means that, when they take people out who really touch the nerve and get traction.
Was this Maxwell Bates Spires? Is that who you're talking about?
What was his last name? Say it again.
Spires. Maxwell Bates Spires, 39.
That could have been him, yes, because he's a Brit, and he had like a German name, and his stuff was really fascinating. And I just remember thinking, because I'm always noticing these things, these people that either die or have these weird things happen to them, and then you look into it, and it's like, oh, okay.
Do you know who David Crow is?
David Crow.
David Crow, Infectious Myth.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so I love that guy. He was on my show earlier this year. He, in my opinion, brought the most valuable insight into the germ theory and its weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And he was diagnosed with cancer in June, and he died in July. Right.
And if you look online, there's a British guy. He's done a lot of interesting YouTube videos. He talks about all the information they had. They had a lady that they could give you all sorts of different cancers and stuff back in the 1960s in just a matter of 2 weeks. And so, you look at these different guys down in South America and Central America, the preposterous sort of rates that they get all this cancer, and it's just totally impossible as a statistical matter. And the reason those kinds of things, they resonate with me is that I use kind of a reverse barometer. If it's not really even in the news and no one's even asking questions about it, well, that tells me most of what I need to know. That's an interesting thing for John Quinones to do, right? Why is it? Why isn't John Stossel doing something? He's supposedly so practical and pragmatic. Why isn't he curious about something like that? But no one ever is curious about these things that really matter.
Right.
They're off limits. That's all. They're just off limits. And
then people who go where are off limits, I know these seem like trivial examples, but I think they were people who were not afraid of saying what they thought. Joan Rivers and Anthony Bourdain, I'm totally suspicious about.
Yeah.
But one thing about like the power at the top and that level of, if they're like different kinds of, whether different kinds of people or different kinds of entities, there's this whole layer of clearly, it seems to me, clearly just like us, bureaucrats who follow the orders, who are happy to, it's very, I keep thinking of like
witting participants.
Yeah. They're just participants and they're happy to do it, even though, it's like Soros says when he worked for the Nazis. He was 14 and he was like, whatever, this is fine.
This whole conversation makes me think of this Willie Munzenberg, who I discovered. I know I've been studying this propaganda of Bernays and all these Laswell and all these guys from the Committee on Public Information and back in the 1800s, Lenin and all these guys. But I had never heard of this Willie Munzenberg until Monica sent this book, Double Lives, Spies and Writers in the Secret Soviet War of Ideas. And it's fascinating to read about all of the covert networks of power set up just around the world that are run by these people that you never see or hear of. What are your thoughts on these kind of propaganda networks?
I think they're probably so much more extensive than the average person can ever imagine. It's just, well, especially now with the electronics, they have the ability to collect so much data. Yeah. And so I think men on the ground so much like they had with Munzenberger's sort of mastery. That guy was a genius.
Yeah.
You know, dude was incredibly brilliant in the way he approached things, but he didn't have access to the kind of stuff they have now, which is people voluntarily signing up to just put their life online and show everybody. You hardly even have to go about collecting the data. Just a matter of housing the data in huge computers and then sorting the data. It's not even so much collecting anymore. And so I think the game has probably changed over time, especially with AI. That is a huge game changer that most people they do not understand what a game changer that is, how much they see and read is controlled by AI, just the ungodly ability. This type of insane corona event could never have happened even with the world's most extensive kind of Munzenberger setup in the past, because there just was no ability to write the articles and to disseminate information.
Yeah, that's what I think about the technology being the difference maker here.
Huge.
That you're just going to get that. And one of the things about the kids now homeschooling, of course, we all want our kids to homeschool. It's great, great, great. I think they're putting them in this pipe and they're going to be sorted and curated by AI. And you can't move to the next level until your auto teacher says, okay, you checked the right boxes. I think they're funneling the kids through the AI is where this is going.
Yeah, they could very well have a certified AI have to pass the student because they don't want to allow what they're calling now is pandemic pods, which is really just parents getting together with other parents and hiring a teacher, them teaching just a small group of kids themselves like they used to do it before public education. But they want to stop that. So they've been trying to demonize that in the news as of the past couple of weeks. And AI could be a way to do that. Here, your certified AI has to approve till you go to the next round. You can't go to the next round. Bring in one of our teachers.
I hear these kinds of things. I'd never heard of this. Would you call it something pod?
They call it a pandemic pod is what they're calling it.
I hadn't heard that. But whenever I hear anything like this, I see these things in the news. I hear these things. They just crack me up because they're so preposterous on their face.
Yeah.
I always picture how brainwashed a human being has to be to hear something like this and to think in any way this is going to be legitimate, that somebody from government is going to show up at your house and is there to actually help you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just mind-bending to me.
It is, yeah. And I think that's like brain control, brainwashing in action. It subverts all logic and people are like, yeah, okay.
Completely. They understand psychology so well.
Yeah.
And they keep that from us. But I've gotten to the point where when I see them with the mask mandates and like today they came out with lemons, limes, and oranges are tainted. And I'm thinking,
what?
Yes. Last week it was onions. And this is like, hey, lemons, limes, and oranges have salmonella on them. It makes me feel like they might be trying to hurt us.
Wow. I mean, there's no limit to what people will believe. It's become abundantly clear.
I have to blow your mind with one statistic, though. This is completely irrelevant. I just want to make you laugh. So, and you're the only person I know who would actually laugh at something like this. So, there was a study done by the Journal of JAMA, the American Medical Association Journal, published a study from April in New York City, where they examined a bunch of groups of people. And one of the groups of people they looked at were people over 65 diagnosed with COVID. And they had people who went on ventilators and people who did not go on ventilators. So the people who did not go on ventilators, their mortality rate was 26%. The people over 65 who did go on ventilators, their mortality rate was 97.2%. 97 points. So basically, if you're in the group that goes on the ventilator, you're definitely going to die.
Right.
So why put anyone on a ventilator?
Oh, see, they were very serious cases, though. See, they had to get them on a ventilator. It's all
definitely going to die. But they were definitely going to die on the ventilator. If you can figure out who's going to die and who's not going to die to that level of refinement, then just kill them.
You get $39,000 for putting them on.
Yeah, that's
so as soon as they come in, it's like, whoa, I think we need to put you on the vent. I immediately think of that Monty Python scene where they bring out your dead. And no, actually, I'm feeling a lot better. No, he'll be dead soon. He'll be dead soon.
No, I'm fine.
And the thing about that one is that two of my very close friends, one guy I've known for 45 years, and he's an MD, and one of my other friends I've known for 25 years, he's an MD. And the reality is they both said that what's happening here is not something that requires a vent. These people are having embolisms, and when you put someone who's having an embolism on a vent, you kill them. And that's the problem, is putting them on the vent was what was killing them, because since nobody's allowed to speak honestly about what this might even be, you just have to follow the script that this is COVID, and then you look down through your reimbursable CPT code and you see what, quote, best practices are, and the CDC releases new crap every single day, and all they do is just try to run through the thing in this organized fashion to collect the maximum amount of money. And while they have the wrong idea that this thing's a virus and it does X, Y, and Z, well, what happens if that's all not true?
Well, that's
what happens if that's not true? Then you're going to kill them on the vent.
Yeah, I think all the deaths are from policy, and then you see that they're handing out liability protection left and right, even over and above the fact that they're already protected for doing anything that's a policy.
God knows how much malpractice was occurring there. You know, you have this weird anomaly that occurred in New York City, the same exact place where they had 911. You have this oddity that's not been reproduced anywhere else, and that now nobody's allowed to go investigate. Cuomo won't allow an independent investigation of what went on. Well, of course he can't allow an independent investigation of what went on, because what went on was a bunch of crookery, and they killed a bunch of people, and that's the way it is. And so, of course, you can't go investigate it. But whatever it was that happened, we don't know what happened. Too. Nobody knows what happened. You weren't allowed in the hospitals. It all happened in just a few hospitals and then at these nursing homes. And of course, what they do, they don't allow anybody to go in the nursing home. You still can't go in and check on people. Yeah. So you have no idea what's going on with their health. They could be injecting people. There's no way to know what's going on. You just trust. And I've told people before, if a private entity shut down access to a hospital or a nursing home, didn't allow people in, then they started having fantastically distorted population deaths statistically, there'd be a criminal investigation and they'd be sued. But the government does it, shuts them all down. The exact same thing happens, and people run around virtue signaling about what a fantastic job they did and all the lives they saved. It's always upside down. I saw a little bit of the Trump show yesterday. I hadn't watched that thing in months. I know it hadn't been on for a while. But he's out there. He's literally throwing out numbers like, well, they're doing a fantastic job. They're doing a wonderful job. If we hadn't shut this down, or I hadn't closed it down, we'd have 1.5 million, 2 million deaths. These are just made up numbers. Why don't you just say 20 million deaths? We have no information at all to prove that they saved 1.5 million lives, 2 million lives, even one life. There's no evidence for even one life. Yeah. And yet they act as though all this stuff is saving all these lives because, again, nothing has to connect up in any way to reality. They just have to say it. That's all they have to do is just say it.
That's what the FBI does, too, when they entrap someone who is really of low IQ into making a bomb or something that the FBI made and brought to them and then arrested after giving to them. But the ventilator stuff, while all this was going on, while these people were dying at a high rate, which we pointed out really pretty early on because of the experience that
Binkley has experience with, And so he knew the vents. He was like, "Don't put people on vents."
Those are they tell you when you put a family member on a vent, they say this person's probably not going to come off. That's the talk you get when someone goes on a vent, and all this dying is going on, yet the media is saying, we don't have enough vents. We don't have enough ventilators. Invoke the Defense Production Act and make more ventilators. And now Trump is promoting how we have more ventilators than everybody in the world.
They 100,000.
Yeah.
We can kill them at a faster rate than anybody.
We
These
can
are
kill
great
twice.
Numbers.
You're right.
No one's ever seen numbers like this. Right. No one thought we could do it.
It does seem a little Hitler-esque, whatever.
Yeah, well, it's just all so silly because it's all totally disconnected from reality. There hasn't even been any discussion about whether or not this is a bioweapon that we created. But there may be multiple bioweapons that have been released. It's not even something you're allowed to investigate. Neither side's talking about it. All of the information flows through government. All of the narratives are tightly controlled. And that's, to me, it's always the simplest answer is that, they're not even asking the right questions. That's the key to me. It's not whether or not you get straight answers, because you're never going to get straight answers out of government or anybody else. Right. The question is, are they even asking questions that could get an answer that could be damaging?
Well, that's
but
why
they
I
don't
thought
even do that.
it was so telling that in 8.5 years of me saying that I thought Boston Marathon bombing was an inside job, I knew where MH370 was. I mean, I would like lay out details. Miriam Carey has Obama's baby. Like, I was saying stuff that was great. You know, it wasn't crazy. I was like offering evidence, but the thing that got them to say, oh, we're taking you off the air, it just happened to be when I started talking about this stuff. And when you go and listen, like, absolutely no one is asking the real questions. But here's the thing that I think is just, I can't get away from. I feel like if you look at like my dad, probably your dad, well, I don't know about your dad, but my dad was skeptical. He fought in World War II and he came back and he had this book, Backdoor to War. And he read it. It was about FDR letting Pearl Harbor happen. And I feel like that was in the 50s. Maybe it's a romantic fantasy, but I just feel like in the 50s, it was harder to fool all of the people all of the time. For sure.
For sure. I mean,
so it's because of that we've got this problem, is that people are just so, I don't know if it's trusting or stupid or we can't be stupid, but, you know, we probably have the same
so
IQs.
much brainwashing. Just so much, you know.
And lack of critical analysis and that thought you have to
I
get
think
in
they
line
grossly
with your thought.
underestimate the damage that television does. I really think they do. And now with the smartphones, even more so. But, you know, just sitting in front of a TV, you really are hypnotized. And, you know, that first sort of generation that kind of grew up with TV is really kind of my generation, maybe a little before, in the 50s kind of thing. But there wasn't a huge amount on. Even when I was a kid, there was really only 3 channels in a UHF. And you watched a little, but you didn't just sit there and watch TV all day. I was outside all day. And
I watched 3 channels at once, man.
Right.
Right, screen and screen. You can do it on the same screen.
Yeah, and there's just clearly a large portion of the population is simply incapable of defending themselves against that brainwashing. Now, because it's very similar to me to why I get people all the time, well, how come some people can see it and some people can't see the scam? It's like, I can't answer it outside of the fact that I don't see any connection between education, any kind of financial situation, race, age, gender, nothing. There's people from all over can see. And then there's a huge number of people who can't see. And even when you tell them directly, they can't put the pieces together. And I think that TV is very similar in that it just has a massive effect on a huge portion of the population. And then on another portion of the population, it affects them, but they're able to overcome it if they care to. And it's just, there it is. I mean, the population is so fantastically brainwashed now. But, you know, the other part of that is that, yes, people saw it, and there were public figures like in the 30s, McFadden, all sorts of people spoke out, you know.
They killed him, did they not?
And they kill him. But at least there were people in public positions who actually spoke truth.
Right.
And they called out the people. And yeah, they paid a price for it. There's no doubt about it. But you don't even have anything remotely like that today. Nobody is out there as a public figure, certainly at a high level, that's speaking any truth at all.
What about Kanye?
I don't like Jeff Sessions' policies at all. He's just a neocon, I guess, whatever. But I thought he was kind of like had the courage because he had confidence in his intelligence and experience. And I suspected that they kind of pulled him into the administration and then dirtied him up and threw him out because he would have been difficult in the Senate over some things, not most things. But anyway,
it's
that's
possible.
just a weird thing for me. But there's something about the TV I wanted to comment, which is, and I got this from Kaczynski's thing, this recent thing, which was really just the old thing, that TV and Prozac and all this kind of stuff is a function of a very unhealthy kind of level of stress, unautonomous, like overworking kind of thing. And I can see that in this. So I used to be an investment banker, and I would just, even if I got off at 2 a.m, I would just drink or whatever. I just had to let go. And then I was a mom, and I was reading Tolstoy in my spare time. And now I'm doing this, and I'm like literally doing both. I'm like just not Tolstoy. I'm just watching TV and drinking and just trying to turn it off, because all I do all day now is follow the news, which is exhausting, emotionally and mentally. And I feel like that to get people to just have to be weekend warriors or let loose at night, like the whole structure of the system has to kind of be like that, because you do kind of get hungry for a little activity, a little mental activity, a little physical activity. That's why I feel like the protests were just, all they had to do is lock everybody up for 10 weeks and then say the only thing you're allowed to do is go run down that street and throw bricks through this window or whatever, that they really wouldn't even have gotten the rise, that the whole structure of the system is set up to circumvent the kind of complexity of the human spirit. That's kind of
for sure.
arranging idea. But I feel like they are so sophisticated, and that nothing is, they control it more than some people think. Binkley, I think, disagrees with me.
The mind control box, which Netflix, we talk about this a lot. The founder of Netflix and its first CEO was the son of Edward Bernays, the famous famous propagandist, Freud's nephew. It's a brilliant plan for them, because we work all day and then we go to escape to veg out in front of a mind control box that, when our minds are at its most weakest and least critical and most receptive to manipulation, we escape to a box that feeds us with propaganda in that vulnerable state.
Just washes over the naked brain.
Yeah. And it's more indirect as opposed to the more direct propaganda we might see.
I have teenagers plugged directly into the Matrix. Like my daughter will say to me, I don't care if you're right. I cannot believe you, or I will be ostracized.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she sees the videos on YouTube, which warns her against people like me. Yeah, it's no joke. She's like, oh my gosh, there's this video about, do you know a truther? Like, are they blah, blah, blah? And
Truther.
Yeah, I know. A truther. Aren't you a truther? Isn't everybody fucking truther?
And there's these language signals that tell people whether or not you're a truther and should be avoided. Like hydroxychloroquine, as we talked about earlier. If your doctor says that, then your doctor must be a Trump supporter and you need to stay away from that Nazi. That kind of...
Just the level is so funny to me. There was an interesting book in the 70s, I don't know if you've ever seen it, called 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. And it's a small book. It's really, really a good book. It was written by a guy that escaped the Eastern Bloc. And so when he came over, he hadn't seen a lot of TV. And it's just a fascinating little book, because it goes through the fact that it's not just a bad idea, that it's really truly a dangerous technology that people simply are not capable of dealing with because of the way it actually operates. And, you look at the decline. Yeah, there was a lot of screwed up stuff in the early 19th century. Hell, there's always been a lot of screwed up stuff, and people believed all sorts of nonsense. But today, it's just so far from reality. There's literally nobody talking about something that's real out in the public square. It's just completely off limits. And you think about someone, even say Barry Goldwater. Imagine Barry Goldwater actually being a major party candidate. That guy is really hardcore. He was a seriously hardcore guy. And a guy like John Kennedy, that guy would be a not right-winger today, and he was the Democrat nominee. And you look at what we have now, Biden Harris, a man with dementia, and some joker like Kamala Harris.
She's a cop.
I mean, she's just a lowlife. She just screws people over. And that's being taken seriously. And so that's how far we've fallen in that amount of time.
But I would argue that stuff was on purpose that way, that the radio and the TV and movies.
Oh, for sure. It's all being controlled. It's a long-time plan. I mean, you saw Brzezinski. He wrote in one of his books, was it Between Two Ages?
Yeah, 72.
And, it's just, he lays it out. There it is. It's not like it's hidden. That's the thing.
And his daughter is a mouthpiece. Like Chris Cuomo's brother. Chris Cuomo is Andrew Cuomo's brother, and he's the news guy who's telling you about what's really happening in New York.
I mean, how many things do they have to have, right? You got Anderson Cooper. You just go down the list of these people.
Whose only job outside of in the media was in the CIA. Did you know that? Cooper's only jobs when he went to Yale, his 2 summer jobs were in the CIA. And then when he graduated, he decided not to get a real job, but to be this intrepid, independent freelancing reporter who had access to all these obscure, like Southeastern Asian countries. It's like, really? Are you sure you don't know anybody in the CIA?
It is a joke. It's a total joke.
They put it out there. Bill Barr. They even on his Wikipedia, they claim he joined the CIA after law school for 1 year. Well, that's ludicrous. I mean, nobody joins the CIA for 1 year.
I mean, it didn't work out for me. So
he's obviously a CIA, long-time CIA deep operative. And you look at a guy like Colonel Prouty, who wrote his book, Secret Team, and that was like early 70s or something. And, he talks about then how they had deep cover agents whose entire careers were spent in the private sector and all these different things. And they may or may not have ever been called on, but they were there with an incredible backstory that was untouchable anytime they needed them. And if anyone thinks that the situation has improved since the early 70s, they're living in a dreamland. Those operatives are everywhere. And that goes to your Munzenberger question. They're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. They're buried in everything. They have unlimited funds to finance these jokers. They run the damn drug trade, so they get all that dark money. They have unlimited funds. We have no idea. When you have something called the Bank of International Settlements, where all you have is basically a coded ID, at any time they want, they can simply punch in a coded ID, put money into an account, and nobody could ever know. And it's legitimate money. It's in an account. Now, it doesn't even have to be earned. It's just there now. It's almost impossible to defend against an opponent that has those kinds of resources.
See, but here's the thing. If they can and they can create the money out of thin air, they're absolutely doing that constantly. And it seems to me that this can't be about the money. It cannot be about the money. And what is it really, like at this point, is it even fun? So it's not about the money. It's about something bigger than that. And can it even be fun for you? They're basically just domesticating humanity, I guess, as a way to think of it, where they're pets. And is that even fun to like make the people so stupid that it's not even fun to dominate them? Like, what's it all about?
What is the end game? I had a friend of mine up over the weekend, and we talked a lot. I've known that guy for 40 years, and we talk about it, and I just don't see any positive outcome that doesn't even lead to the mass of humanity being in a very, very bad situation for themselves, or there being very, very few people. I tend to think that the end game is getting rid of these people, and that they don't need them, because what is the point of keeping a bunch of people around that they call useless eaters, eating up resources and getting in the way of everything? There isn't one. If you sit down as a cold calculating matter and you say, if I was going to be a person, I was in charge of this and I was a psychopath and nothing was ever enough for me, because look, think about it. If you have $10 billion, is that not enough? I mean, how are you ever going to spend $10 billion?
I had a thought about this. I was thinking hard about it. Did you ever see the movie WALL-E?
No, I never saw WALL-E.
Yeah, it's a kids thing. But they had all these useless eaters on a ship, and they were mad. Like the evil empire was this corporation that just sold them stuff. But they just sat around eating it. They didn't produce or anything. And I was like, so that doesn't really make that corporation evil because you're not doing anything. But I thought of a reason why they might keep people in situ like this instead of just wiping them out. And it would have to be kind of about the money, and it also can easily lead to like communism and Marxism, which is not where I mean it to go. The problem is the problem, though. So they take the middle class and the upper middle class and they suck away all of the surplus labor from them in the form of taxes, which then subsidizes that useless eater layer, and they consume with all the profits going all the way up to that tiny little triangle at the top. So because that's what it seems like is happening right now with the UBI.
That may be an intermediate step. I just say, I agree. That's what they're doing now.
That's what's happening now.
Yeah, I look out at the picture over the next couple of decades, if we even have that long, who knows? But if they do, if we keep going, why would they do it? What is the point of any of that when they Quite for me, most of the general public, they are an inconvenience. I can't stand interacting with the general public. I can understand why people would want to get rid of them. I have a kind heart, so I would never do that
Sounds like
to them. But it's the same reason I love animals. I would never be an animal. These are people. They have a right to be here. The fact that they're idiots and they're wasting their lives and they're eating chips and they're riding around in scooters, that's what they want to do. Knock yourself out. I just don't want to be around it.
Well,
but
I think
I could see if I controlled as much as they do. And I was twisted and I didn't actually care if I tortured people and stole all their stuff, which they clearly don't care.
Right.
Then I just don't see any outcome that doesn't end up being that there aren't a lot of people left.
Well, when you look at Bill Gates, who is the most recognizable voice on this health crisis after
he's a front
Fauci,
man, for sure.
and but his actual claim to fame prior to this, his number one goal was to reduce the population. So it's kind of weird that the guy who wants to reduce the population is the guy who's supposed to save us all from a health problem that's killing people.
Again, it's just a blatant contradiction in the narrative, which I think they do all the time because they love revelation of the method. And we've been in revelation of the method for 20 years now, since 911.
Well, that's what Event 201 was. It had to have been.
Yeah, they if you believe the stuff that they write about that stuff, that kicked it off. That was kind of the kickoff to this phase that they call revelation of the method, where they don't even attempt to hide it anymore. They literally put it in your face, and that's what they're doing. And the purpose of it is, if when you think about it, it does make sense. Is the problem that they demoralize the living crap out of people who can see it, and just make it such that there's literally no limit to what they can do, because the people who do kind of catch on look at them and say, wow, they've just got it on such lockdown. They literally say the word and the entire world locks down.
But people who step out of there, I know somebody, I'm in California right now, and I know people who are being prosecuted for keeping their businesses open or doing things outside the realm. So it's not, it looks totally voluntary to me, which is just disgusts me, but I do it. I mean, I'm not causing any trouble. I'm no troublemaker, so there you go. But if I were, they would actually take steps. So there is that deterrent thing, and they are so powerful that I personally don't feel like I could win that battle.
Well, it's always, to me, it's always a question of whether or not it's value. I'm not going to step in front of a freight train, but that's why I focus on trying to explain to people and see if I can convince some people. And I just, I get demoralized over time. I gave up writing on my blog years ago just for the same reason.
I liked your blog. Like, I've been enjoying it. It's old. I see that, but I've been enjoying it. But this is when I lost hope. I got to tell you that I had this radio show, and people would call in, and everybody would complain about Obama ignoring the Constitution and yada, yada. And then Trump got in, and I would complain about Trump ignoring the Constitution. And then my favorite quote is, I said, he's not the commander in chief unless he's called into actual service. Like, stop calling him that. It's not, it matters that there's a war. It matters that the Congress calls him in, whatever. And someone said, you're quibbling about semantics. And so it made people who hate Obama for the Constitution and claim that they're not racist, which don't doubt. Then when Trump comes along, I'm quibbling about semantics when I quote the Constitution, and that's when I kind of gave up.
Yeah. Well, there are hypocrites. Both sides are just such terrible hypocrites. And, it's been clear to me they're hypocrites for 20 years now. That's the problem. And that's why I exited out of that entire constitutional conservative crap. And then when I figured out what a complete scam the Constitution even is, that's when I was,
because
fully black-pilled.
It's a setup for this, like, that it was meant to be like the Lysander Spooner thing, like whether it be one thing or another, here we are kind of thing.
Yeah, I go back and forth on whether or not some of the founders were clearly bad guys. I mean, Burr shot him for a reason. He was a piece of crap, okay? And there's lots of people that really probably needed to be shot. And,
of course, Hamilton's the one they make a Broadway play out of.
Of course. Well, all you hear about is the Federalist Papers. But the reality is, it's such a distortion the way people talk about, oh, we fought a revolution to have the Constitution. Not bullshit. We did not. We fought it, and they got the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
And to tell me that the people were clamoring for Washington to be a king, what a load of crap. Look what they chose. Articles of Confederation. That is so far from a king. So far from a king.
No ability to tax.
The only things they needed with the Constitution was the ability to tax. That's what they really, really wanted, and to rule that interstate commerce. And they knew they could grow it over time. But the problem I have with the Constitution, the way people talk about it, is the way they constantly misrepresent it, as though that's what happened after the Revolution. It was a long time after the Revolution before they brought that Constitution in. If you talk about someone's life, it was a long time.
Was there like
years
8
and years and
presidents
years.
before?
It was 10 years, I think.
Yes, years and
One
years and years.
president
It's
a
like
year.
saying the war ended in 2008 and now we're going to have the Constitution. Well, it's a whole different group
Yeah.
of people. A lot of the people who were signing the Declaration of Independence, they weren't even around for that Constitution, and tons of them didn't trust it because they knew what was going on. And the whole thing is a scam. And the fact that the people ignore that Articles of Confederation and how effective it was at keeping the federal government small. It was
I don't
totally
ignore
impossible.
it. I talk about it all the time.
Impossible.
And
Yeah.
I'll tell you that. Go ahead.
No, it's just, that's right. But people who know understand that power to lay the tax and require it is completely different than the idea that you have to ask the states and they give it to you or they don't. That's it.
Yeah,
That's it.
And that's how it got. The two things that I think are the ability, or it's like one thing really, that could have survived. I blame Thomas Jefferson and Marbury v. Madison for getting rid of it, is that you could have had state nullification if they didn't think that the Supreme Court ruled. Because I looked at it and I thought, Congress can pass these laws and the Supreme Court says whether they're constitutional or not. But what if the Supreme Court didn't do that and Congress wanted to enforce it on the states? They couldn't, because there's no enforcement mechanism in the Constitution. Then I looked at, so where does the DOJ come from, or the FBI?
Well, it's just a made-up thing after the Civil War.
Yes. Nobody. I looked into that and I was like, look, they just did this after the Civil War.
It's
I
just
bet
a
the
load of
South
crap.
wasn't getting in line.
Yeah, it's just a load of crap. It's
Right,
just
but
total load
because
of
they
crap.
had the taxes, they could do that stuff. They
Sure.
could get away with it because then all of a sudden they had the money to pay the strong men.
Right. Well, I guess my position about the Constitution kind of thing, whenever I have interactions on Twitter or some other place, the simple fact is, look, whatever the Constitution was, it doesn't matter at this point because it's been dead since 1861. It's totally impossible to hold a voluntary union together with a war. Whether or not slavery is wrong or not, fine. Even though the war wasn't about slavery for the North, it doesn't matter. The South was fighting to keep its slaves and its, quote, lifestyle. I get it. Slavery was dying anyway. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Concede every point that it was the worst possible intentions. Okay. It still doesn't take away the fact there is no consent. You can't go down and take a group of people by force and then claim that they're in there with their consent. You just can't. There is no possible way the Constitution survived the Civil War. It's utterly impossible. Regardless of what it was, it is no longer a union of voluntary states. That's it. And so that's what we're told. And that's a blatant lie that I don't have to contest anything in history in order to prove. And so that's the reason I don't spend a huge amount of time talking about how the Constitution may or may not have occurred, or what they might have done with it. It's obvious on its face, whatever happened during the Civil War, that's it. Constitution's been dead. It's totally dead. And to claim it's not dead is preposterous, because there is no way logically to have a voluntary union of states where half the states were forced in at gunpoint.
Right. And
idiotic.
if there was if there were unacceptable terms for you to be in partnership with other states, and those terms were there when you entered into that partnership, it's not valid to then start a war to get them to stop that.
Well, of course, all of the arguments that Smyrna makes are, of course, excellent. And there's a great book. It's almost unreadable called Disquisition on Government that Calhoun wrote. It really is. The prose is so formal. But, man, the reasoning, that dude was a genius. You read that book he wrote in the early 1800s, it completely describes exactly how the Constitution was supposed to work. And he was dead right.
Wow. What book is that again?
It's called The Disquisition on Government. And again, terrible title. I mean, you can't even get through the title. The book is so difficult to read.
Test.
But it's so interesting. And I remember when I read it, I thought, wow, there was a time when there were people who talked about this and they discussed this. And this is a level of sort of knowledge and education that's like eons above anything people get. But I wanted to make one interesting point about Marbury, because I remember being in law school and getting that stupid class, and the very first case you read about it in con laws is this ridiculous case. And what's so stinking funny to me about Marbury, again, it's just typical. Everything's upside down. Does anybody remember what the holding in Marbury was? Does any lawyer remember what the holding was?
The only thing I remember was that it wasn't even the issue.
Okay, then there was no jurisdiction. There's no jurisdiction. Well, every lawyer knows that if there's no jurisdiction to hear a case, to rule on it, that's addressed up front. All jurisdictional questions are addressed up front, because there's nothing to do on the case if you don't have jurisdiction. Well, every single thing that's in Marbury about this, well, we hear the case and all that, that's all crap, because it's 100% dicta that never should have been in the opinion at all, because there's no jurisdiction. The first thing they should have just said was, we've examined such and such, we find we don't have jurisdiction. There's nothing else to say about it. That's it. And the reason Marbury is what it is, and the reason it's used, is that if he had tried at that time to actually rule and found jurisdiction, try to impose something, they would have impeached his ass, or they might have gone and just simply dragged him out and hung him, because they were not going to accept something like that. That was one of those little tiny kernels they put in there, and then they misrepresent again and again and again. It gets blown up into this big thing. A lot of lawyers also don't know, which is something I wasn't taught in law school. There's no such thing as an opinion of the court prior to the time Marshall took over. There was no such thing as that. You know that? You ever heard of that? Well, that's the reality. Sorry, someone came in. The reality is that every judge.
We're keeping you over. Do you mind staying a few minutes?
Oh, yeah, no problem. No problem. Okay. It's just the janitorial staff trying to come in. But the reality is every judge wrote an opinion or didn't write an opinion. That was it. There was no opinion of the court. That's just something he dreamed up to make it look like it's this sort of, substantial thing. And I bring this issue up with people. I think I even referenced it in one of my podcasts, when the reality is the court sounds like this great thing. But what if there was just one judge up there? If there was only one? There's nothing in the Constitution sets the number. They've had a variety of numbers many different times. In fact, the biggest court packing event that occurred right after the Civil War, not during the Depression. That's the one everybody hears about.
Yeah, that's the one I thought.
Threat of court packing.
But that didn't even happen.
It didn't even happen. But there was actual court packing right after the Civil War. And in fact, they jammed through all sorts of legislation with it by threatening the people and just refilling. And so, again, it's this situation where you could just have one justice. You could. Think about that. You could also, in the Supreme Court, since there's absolutely nothing in Article 3, they could also have those 9 justices. And then the Supreme Court itself could say that all we have to have is one justice and 8 dissenters, and the court opinion holds as one. There's absolutely nothing in the Constitution that would prevent that. This is how crazy it is when you start thinking about how absurd this idea is, that the Supreme Court is in charge and tells us the law and all this other bullshit that people spread and that they teach in law school. When I start telling people about these things in Article 3 that could actually exist, okay, we have no idea what the when they go into session and they go back and they start thinking about what they're going to do and supposedly writing their opinions and talking about stuff, it's all 100% confidential. We have no idea what they're doing. None. That's just something they make up. The idea that it has to be a majority opinion, that if a majority, if 5 out of 4 do it, then you have an opinion. There's nothing in the Constitution about that.
There isn't. That's a good point.
Why doesn't it have to be a unanimous decision? And like I said, there's the fact that it doesn't have to be unanimous. There's nothing that prevents them from just saying, well, if one judge finds it, that's what we do. There'd be absolutely nothing anybody could do about that. And so when you start thinking about these crazy scenarios that could exist, that could exist under the Constitution, it's just more evidence that what people say the Supreme Court's there to do, it's just not true. It's just not true. That's all. It's just simply not true. It's there to hear one case. That's it.
this experiment with self-limiting government, let's say it lasted 10 years. Like I feel like I look at the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the American Revolution, it seems like they all kind of lasted 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I can't help but think that it's all a setup from the beginning anyway. So it's kind of meant to not really last, but you get the good idea and you get all the people to get behind it, and then you swap it out at the top. But it begins to feel, I mean, I've come a long way in how I've thought about it, because for all those years that I kind of interacted within this framework, trying to defend the Bill of Rights and, just defend it to the end.
Sure.
And I recently read a book called Against the Grain, which basically, I've been talking about it a lot lately, but it basically just changed the way I think about the world. So it's one of those kind of seminal books for my thought. And the idea is that, and I always wondered this, was the Garden of Eden, true or not, a metaphor for the fall of man and the fountain of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, all about the agricultural revolution and all of a sudden having to work by the sweat of your brow? And I just always had that in the back of my mind. And then I read this guy says basically not only that, but the reason the agricultural revolution became the system is we had 4,000 years of people kind of being sedentary hunter-gatherers with the understanding of domestication, but didn't just completely turn into an agrarian society. And then cereal grains specifically, harvested at the same time, were capable of being taxed. So the taxman would come at harvest time and take half of it. And then they would even enslave you for it. And it got me to think that really the true nature of the state for 10,000 years of its existence, which coincided with the agricultural revolution, was basically this idea of taxation and de facto slavery. And it makes me, it makes me feel rather hopeless. And I feel like this is my life. I'm looking outside on a swing set and a couple of cars. I'm not trying to live in an alluvial plain and pick berries as they grow. I just don't know how to reconcile, true liberty or human nature with this extremely complex, very large, essentially controlled from the top scenario. I need to get my, see through the board here, and I can't. It's
very difficult. And, I really think that the game changer was when the frontier closed on this side. That was it. That was all the land. You used to be able to simply leave and go out and kind of be left alone. You had problems out there because there's other people living out there, but this is a very small population compared to what we have now, and you could go out and just kind of leave. And I think that was the big game changer. Was once there really was nowhere else to go, people like me were just kind of screwed because there is no escape. We are now on a closed system where there is nowhere to go, where there's not government to come jack you over. That's it.
Prouty opened my mind to that in his book on JFK. I think it was called The JFK Assassination or something, but it was about a lot more. Did you read that one?
I never read his book on JFK. I've never been fascinated with that JFK, but yeah.
No. It was so much more than that. And it opened basically with this idea that during the age of exploration, whenever that was, 1400 something, that Magellan basically made it clear the size of the realm to conquer, kind of like that. Then the kings or the powers that be could get their minds around it and then just set out to do it.
Right.
and they've done it. And then you can bring it all the way up to Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes, and the British Empire that I think, if I'm not mistaken, he said kind of as it looked like it was, the sun was setting on the British Empire at last. He's just go underground, make everybody speak English, spread social democracy, have these wars, open up the markets, and we can still rule the world, kind of. And if it all comes to that, but it feels like a closed system, in which case the only hope is to think outside the system, which is kind of where we started on this. It's not going to work here, so enjoy it, and let's see what the fifth dimension brings.
I just tend to think that these are long, long cycles, and the history we've been given is a load of crap. Have you ever read that book, Forbidden Archaeology, Cremo wrote in the early 90s or late 80s?
No, I have forbidden history. People have sent me a few forbidden books, but forbidden archaeology. Say it again.
Jim Morris is the one that you have.
Oh, Jim Morris is the one I have.
Yeah, that one either.
Forbidden archaeology
is worth getting.
Really?
It's a big book, so maybe 700 pages. The thing that's fascinating about it is that it just shows that, and the thing that's interesting to me about it is that if any piece of this, anything in there, and he's got just example after example, it's just clear as day. If any of it's true, then the entire history we've been given is all complete crap.
Can you give an example? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would give you the example of Dwarka, which anybody can look up, the city off of India that they found now that was allegedly just this sort of spiritual city in books, and they didn't think it could exist. Well, now they've actually found it, and it's underwater in an area where, at minimum, the last time that place would have been not underwater in the Indian Ocean would have been 25 to 30,000 years ago. And it's a huge city, and it's exactly like it's predicted in all their books. And so there's other ones, and they found all these different highly skilled tools that were steel and all sorts of other things. They found it inside of things. And when they were doing a mining, they would chip out some giant piece of coal or some other thing, and there'd be a tool inside there. Okay, well, it's in a tunnel. They're digging. It's just no explanation.
How did you get comfortable with this? That you read this and you feel like you're convinced by it?
Oh, well, I mean, you have to read his book. You'll see how much stuff is in there. He has a fascinating amount of the detail in there. He has all the different news clippings of the day of when the stuff was found. And of course, things like the Smithsonian Institute, those things are found simply to go around, collect all the stuff and then bury it.
Yes.
People imagine it's there to help them. It's not. It's just around there to collect all the stuff up. Of course, the Vatican archives are the same thing. They go around, but prior to the Smithsonian, they would just travel the world, and whatever stuff they find, stuff that screwed with
what
their
WikiLeaks
narrative,
does.
they just drag it back, they kill the people, make sure they have all the copies, and they take it back with them, and that's it. And so these types of things have existed a long time. And for me, as far as the comfort level goes, is that these are just long, very long cycles, thousands and thousands of years. We've probably been through countless numbers of them at this point on the planet. And so to me, I get a perverse kick out of the idea that I might get to see the end of one of them. That's kind of cool to me. I mean, there's not that many people they get to, and it's unlikely I will, because in all likelihood I'll die in a way that I won't be sure, but I hope I could last long enough to be like, oh yeah, this is definitely the major culling, billions and billions are going this time. It'd be like, okay, well, at least I got to see it, because there's not a damn thing I can do to stop it. I think of more like Woody Harrelson in that movie 2012 or something, when he's reporting from the edge of the volcano and the thing's blowing up and he's all stoked that it's blowing up. He just gets blown up himself. But there's no stopping it. If it's coming, coming, it's coming. And I really think that it's gotten so bad, just so polluted people's minds, everything about it's so screwed up, that you just have to kind of clean the slate. And people don't want to hear that, but
I don't feel it. No, you're actually making me feel better about it, because it's a much bigger perspective. And I've actually had that thought where, like, I thought if I died and went to heaven and I had eternity, and God was like, well, whatever, knock yourself out. What do you want to do? My first thought, even since I was a little kid, I thought I would pick a time and live a whole lifetime during a particular time, like the 1900s, where I'd look good in a bustle or something. Like, I just would pick something cool. And then I thought, maybe I picked this.
It's not bad. Like I said, I mean, I don't think it's that bad an outcome if they're going to do it. Like, okay, we'll have them around for this. And I'm getting closer and closer convinced that this is the end game. Now, whether or not that means they take us all out and they get to, live in some kind of Elysium style thing, I don't know. But whatever it is, it's going to be a very big event. We are coming up to big events. This world is massively changing, and I'm in the middle of it. And I'm very well positioned, and it's not going to blindside me. All these people, it's going to blindside. They're not going to know what's coming. I'm going to see exactly what's coming. And it's like, okay. So it's, it's just like I said, for me, I get a perverse pleasure out of the fact that these big giant things that move through history, this is a really big one. I mean, it's a really, really big one. To the extent there are people 150, 200 years from now to talk about it, this will be big. Big.
Well, now you're scaring me again. I was happy, and then I thought as I see, because if everything blows up, then I don't have to worry about my kids. See, but
Yeah.
if there are people 150 years from now, you got me back, so now I have to worry.
Well, I'm saying
are my kids
we
going to
don't
be
know.
evil? Are they going to be enslaved? Are they going to be
Oh,
tortured?
yeah. Well, I mean,
can't-
if there's people, it's going to be very few. I really don't see that there's going to be large numbers of people. So the chance of them making very low. I mean, I think the likelihood of people getting wiped on a really large basis is huge. You know?
I love that that's how he's making you feel better. They're not going to make it. You don't have
It's
to worry
making me
about
feel
it.
better a little bit because the one thing I could not live with is if I created someone who would be able to function in that other world. Like, that's what I don't. I try to tell my kids, like, if you're not in the tunnel with me, then I don't care if you succeed. Like, we're going to fight in the tunnels, or
Right.
you're not mine.
Right. Well, I know a lot of people that think like that. To me, again, I go back to the fact that, hey, everybody's individual life, they're going to be fine. They're really going to be fine if they're here, they're not here, whatever. They're ultimately going to be completely fine. And again, they might get a great pleasure out of being there and fighting and doing so. You don't know what they might do. We don't know what any individual might do. And so
Well, a lot of people are telling me that they're buying land and planting seeds and
That's right.
growing animals, and they're enjoying it.
Okay, well, then that's great, and I wish them the best with that. I know that's not me. I've had a lot of people. I know this. I've done a lot of work with disability law in the past, and I've known a lot of people who were disabled. I've also known a lot of people who say, "Oh, if I was ever put in a wheelchair, I'd just kill myself." Well, the reality is, most people getting put in a wheelchair, they don't just turn around and kill themselves. And it's just you adjust very quickly to negative circumstances, just like you do to positive circumstances. Same reason you get tired of your Lamborghini after you've driven it for a few months. You're bored with it, they buy something else. It's the same way. You can get adjusted to all sorts of different bad situations. And so I would never say that you would feel bad. You certainly shouldn't feel bad for your kids if they make it. They're going to have a life, and they're going to be able to live it and do different stuff.
But I care about the morality. So you said that you do think that this isn't the whole thing for us. And I care about being that, not being a small, petty, successful little human. I want something more.
Well, morality is a personal issue, all right? I mean, there's really not a morality when it comes, just like saying they're we the people. It's just a made-up thing. There's only individuals, ultimately. So if they're good moral people, then they're good moral people. And if they're not, they're not. And if people abuse them, well, then people abuse them. People abuse me now. I get abused all the damn time. I've been abused countless
I think
times.
you can hold your own.
But I get
I'm worried
abused.
about you.
I get abused all the time. I have many different times through corrupt judges and everything else. It doesn't affect me. You know what I mean? It doesn't affect me, my own personal morality. I just look at it and say, well, that's a pretty screwed up thing. And of course, most of these morals are just made up things anyway. They really ultimately are. Now, I personally like the non-aggression principle, and that's what I kind of apply, that you can't coerce people. But, once you get beyond that, it's pretty murky. I mean, it gets pretty murky to me, but I would just say, people, don't worry about your kids. They're going to be fine. Regardless of what happens, they're going to be fine.
Well, I appreciate that confidence, and I do try very hard to make sure that they're fine. And I actually have a son who has Down syndrome, and I feel like that's the saving grace for my other kids, because that kind of defines our morality. In that you got to take care of each other, and that helps a lot. So these are they, even if they are not human, the big capital T they, we are human, and that's a good thing.
Right.
And
that's all that matters.
And I have a question for you that has absolutely nothing to do with anything, but I also have a cocktail blog, so I have to know what's your favorite cocktail.
Oh, I've gone through phases. I probably drink a lot of old fashions right now, but
bourbon. What do you put in?
Yeah, I like bourbon old fashioned.
What's your favorite?
I like Bullet. I don't do a lot of drinking, to be honest. I used to do a lot more drinking, but I really don't do a lot of drinking anymore. I used to love tequila. I've gone through every one of them except for gin and vodka. I've gone through all the others that I've enjoyed, scotch and bourbon and tequila and rum. But now I kind of like a lot of bourbon.
Well, we have every once in a while, we have a cocktail show, like that's what we do for patrons
cool.
every couple of weeks. So someday we'll invite you if it's a cocktail drinking day, and you can.
There you go.
People will.
Yeah,
love
I drink them.
hilarity.
I just don't have a huge amount of drinking. Exactly.
Right. Well, that was the thing. So I moved out to LA and people are just leaving in droves. And I recognized immediately that the reason everybody was leaving was not because the bars were closed, but because the gyms were closed.
Oh, yeah.
They can't tolerate it.
Sucks.
It's so important to them to have the health clubs open so maybe I'm out of my element out here. I liked it better when I lived in Texas.
Yeah. I have to have access to a gym, and when they closed it down, it really pissed me off. I had to get my home gym squared away, which I did. And so now if they lock me down again, I don't care. I got my gym.
Right.
You know.
See, that's total straight out of Harry Brown, how I found freedom in an unfree world. It's perfect. Right. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. Like, I feel like being that you're a lawyer, I'm like, wow, you know how much this guy's time is worth? I've paid lawyers. Like, you don't want to just ask them bullshit questions for an hour and a half. You gotta
I enjoy talking. I enjoy talking about the topics. I really do.
It is so fun listening to your show. I really enjoy it, and I like that. There were some ups and downs on the where is the hope. I'm gonna have to pick up my favorite. I might have to take a couple of clips out where it ends.
The hope is that your kids probably aren't gonna make it through the 7th or 8th destruction of the planet.
That made me feel better.
People say I'm not an optimist. There you go.
If we were to put a clip at the beginning of the show, it's definitely going to be, you're making me feel better because my kids aren't going to make it. All right, well, leave them laughing. Thank you so much, Legal Man, and I always look forward to your next episode. It's just short enough to keep me wanting more. I think it's genius.
Well, I really appreciate it. I've had fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.